Please enjoy this feature presentation of the Crooked River Radio Network. This program is rated for all audiences.
The World According to Elmer is sponsored by CrookedRiverRadio.com. Crooked River Radio is an internet radio station that is live 24/7 playing top 40 hits from the 60s through the 80s. You can find us on Live 365, Simple Radio, Roku, Radio Garden, and even Alexa, as well as our website. Come on and join us on the Crooked River. Welcome aboard. We're headed for the World According to Elmer, with hosts Jerry Sorensen and Pat Morrow. Don't worry, you'll enjoy it there. Better buckle in and enjoy the ride. Here come our hosts now.
Yeah, here come our hosts now.
Here they are. Well, hello, Pat.
Hey,
Pat
Jerry.
Morrow, our Elmer is with us tonight. He is N8OQP, and I am Jerry Sorensen, KG8RRY, and we're here to talk for ham radio tonight. But before we do that, Pat, how are you surviving the time change?
Oh,
I know.
Good God.
Seems like it's about midnight now, doesn't it?
Yeah, what are we still doing up?
I don't know. You know, just a few weeks ago, it seems like the sun was still up at this time, and the sun was actually going to be up for another, I don't know, 2.5 hours.
Yeah, well, we all just live for February, I guess.
Yeah, well, no, more, I know what I'm living for. It's called April.
Yeah, that too.
February is one of the worst months around here. We're in Ohio, people, so in case you're wondering why we're grousing about our current situation, it's going to be like this for a while, because until about May 1st, things are about to go in the dumper here, and we're about to be in the Arctic darkness.
Well, you don't bottom out as far as the time, the losing daylight. You don't bottom out to that till the 21st of December.
Oh, I know. It's going to get shorter yet. I can remember years ago when I first started in broadcasting, I worked for a daytime station in Stark County. And we were on when the sun was up, because daytime or AM stations back in the day, as soon as the sun went down, they went off the air. And there were several months during the winter time. Imagine this. Imagine all you young people that are used to FM and don't know anything about the old time AM radio stations. Imagine a station that signed on in the morning at 8 o'clock and had to turn their transmitter off at 5 o'clock in the afternoon because it got dark.
Yep.
That's what it was to be at an AM station. Basically, during the wintertime, you only needed one person to announce the station.
Yep.
Those were terrible days. And I mean, the Crooked River, you know, you're used to hearing that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Whenever you want to turn your internet on and you want to listen to the radio, you can do that. But boy, back in those days, it was no dice. If it was dark, your station wasn't on the air, and that was a hard way to make a living back in the day. But that's how it was. And AM was king back in those days. This was the middle 1970s, and there were very few FM stations that had any listeners. Can you see how things have changed in just a few years, Pat?
I remember back when I was in high school, which would have been right around 70, I think, that it was that was the first time I had ever heard WMMS.
You know
and
what?
That was the first FM station I ever heard.
And you know what? You and me too. The first FM station I ever tuned to was WMMS. And they were doing something totally different than everybody else was doing. But this is how life was back then. Having no FM radio in the car, because it was very difficult to get an FM radio in your car. I had to go to Radio Shack and buy what was called an FM converter.
Yep.
And then what you would do is you set your AM radio to like, I forget what it was. Let's just say 1100. And so and the FM converter would pick up the FM station, in this case, WMMS, but then would play your FM signal through the AM car radio. And so all that great sound you're hearing on FM didn't sound so good when it played through the Philco AM only radio in my Ford.
But there was some rockin' AM stations though.
There
Wixie,
was
CL, or
great AM stations. WGAR 1220 out
Yeah.
of Cleveland,
Yeah.
fantastic station. WLS out of Chicago, great top 40 radio.
good old Wixie 1260.
Yeah, and
What was
later
that?
on, WHK came along with Gary D in the morning.
Yep.
There were a lot of great AM stations.
What's that one
on.
out of Detroit or
Oh yeah, you're talking about
CKLW? CKLW. Yeah,
out
that's
of
the one I was
Windsor,
thinking of.
Ontario, which was a Detroit station in reality. And they were the first radio station to give Alice Cooper a chance. They started playing his music, and the rest is history.
Wow.
Nobody would play them before CKLW started playing Alice. Alice could not be heard on the air, and so they launched his career. There were a lot of careers back in those days launched because of radio DJs. Some of them, well, I don't really want to go into what might have passed underneath the table sometimes to getting certain songs on the air. But when they got on the air, boy, did they take off.
And
So
boy, we won't talk about Paola and all that.
yeah, no, let's not
The old
go there
Paola
tonight.
scam from '59. No, we're not going to talk about how. Never mind. I ain't even going there.
Yeah, the people in Cleveland, these, I know that there were guys I've listened to down through the years that might have had some knowledge about those types of things. I can tell you that the stations that I was on, nobody was offering anything for me to play any money. I mean, how far was there? How many people were going to hear their song on 250 watts, right?
More than 0 watts.
Well, yeah, more than 0, but not many more, especially not in that business. But anyway, that just kind of how it was. I've got more watts than that at my station here at home, and I frequently use them, like every time I'm on the air, it seems like. And because of that, I collect these things.
Jerry, I was just going to ask you that. I don't know how you do this. I feel like Ed McMahon here. But
Yeah.
did you get those off the porch of Funk and Wagnall?
This is the only reason anymore at my age that I can go to the mailbox. I'm certainly not going out there for the medical bills. I just go out there to see what QSL cards arrived this week. That's my only interest in the mail anymore. And I do love receiving these things. Thank you guys for sending them. This was a nice contact. This was actually a sideband contact, which is very, very unusual for me these days. Usually everything is CW, but this was a sideband. I was talking one night to a fella in Denver, Colorado, of all places, KOEU, K0EU. There are some ham operators, if I said their call sign O instead of 0, they would have a fit and fall in it. Trust me. But this fellow was a real nice guy. His name is Randy, and we had a real nice conversation. And he's got a beautiful station out in Colorado and a great signal. He came in here about 10 over 5'9", which isn't bad from Denver, Colorado. This station has the coolest call sign of anyone I think that I've ever talked to. This is AA7ZZ. And I love it. You ought to tap this thing out.
He had a nickname himself the Sleeper.
Da did it, da did it, da did it at the end. Oh, it just sounds great in CW, and this was a nice CW call. So AA7ZZ, as in ZZ Top. Now this guy here, I'm going to have to call him up. I'm going to have to call John up, and we're going to have to get, between the two of us, we're going to have to get our signals straight here. I want you to look at this card carefully. This is his card. He is KM4CH. Now, do you recognize this card? Because this is Jerry's card, KG8RRY. There's KM4CH, and here is KG8RRY, and
yeah, I'd be giving him a call.
Wow.
Somebody is doing a little copyright infringing there.
I had this first. Now, doggone it. I'm just teasing. That's going to happen sooner or later. I suppose that's what it was like for the ladies back in 1966 when they would go to the prom and find out somebody else was wearing the dress they picked out. But that's kind of what I thought when I got this.
I wouldn't know. I'm not that old.
And I try to pick out one nice color card every week, and this one is beautiful. This one has to get it here. This is WA1HEW. Look at that. There's the United States of America, and he is located in Pennsylvania. So this was not the longest call of the week by any stretch of the imagination, but it gets kudos because it is the most beautiful card that I received all week. And so good job, Craig, on your card. He was talking to me on a Kenwood TS590, which is a very popular radio. It is amazing the number of people that have Kenwoods. Now, I have no experience whatsoever with Kenwoods, but I have never known one Kenwood owner that had a bad thing to say about his radio. People love those radios.
I've had several Kenwoods in my time.
How did they perform?
The only reason I switched out of them was they didn't have, I wanted something that had the up-to-date features on it like the 7300 did. Yaesu was okay with that, even when they went in and started doing the SD radios. But their waterfall was piece of crap. I like the live waterfall on these radios.
How would you compare then your ICOM 7300 to let's say the Yaesu 991A?
I think the ICOM's better, to be honest.
For what reason?
There's a couple of things to think of here. Whenever you take and put as many features as in that Yaesu, something's got to go space-wise.
Okay.
Where when you're dealing with the 7300, you're just dealing with HF, so they can put more quality whatever into it, and there's more space for what they need to put into it. Both radios are comparable. The 991's got VHF and UHF in it. That's a plus. But as far as
you're saying, the 7300 does not have 2 meters. Does not.
No,
have
it doesn't have. The 7300 goes 6 to 160.
And I would probably, for now, knowing nothing about either one of those radios, because I don't have either one of those radios, but knowing what you just said, then I would have to err towards the side of the ICOM, only because I believe you should not bundle your VHF and your UHF with your HF.
We've had this discussion before.
Yeah.
And when you bundle like that, what happens when the radio breaks?
You got nobody to talk to.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're just talking to the cat at that point.
Until you get it back from Yaesu, and that could be 6 or 8 months.
That it could wind up on a boat somewhere.
Yeah.
And that's not a joke.
Out in the South Pacific.
I heard a gentleman today, one of our friends, from a company in Akron that is a ham radio company, and someone had posed a question to him this week and said, we see that for 3 days now in a row, the IC 7300 has been in stock on your website, which is unusual. And the question was, has transportation on these products gotten better? And he said, in no way has the transportation or has the supply chain gotten any better on any of this ham radio gear. He said that it is all really suffering at this point.
I believe that, considering that about probably 80% of the radios coming into this country are made in Japan or China, Korea.
Yes.
That's
and even some of the Japanese radio, and that has always been an argument. The argument has been, well, it's one thing to have a China radio, but it's another thing to have something made in Japan, because Japanese workmanship is so much higher quality than Chinese workmanship. Which, in the 1960s, when I was a kid, if you would say made in Japan, that was a slur. That meant that product was junk. Now, nobody says that about stuff that's made in Japan anymore now, but they do say it about China. But when I only keep one modern radio in my station. All the other rigs that I have here are all tube rigs, as you know. But my one modern radio is an ICOM 7100, and it's a very refined radio, very high quality. But on the box, it doesn't say made in Japan, at least not on the box that I received from that local company in Akron. It clearly says made in China on the side of that box, and that surprised me because that's an icon.
You go
Yeah.
you go to
And
the
I kept the
cheapest bidder.
box.
You go to the cheapest bidder.
I think so, and then the argument also is made, well, even if a radio is made in Japan or it's made in America, it's probably made with Chinese parts, and that you can't refute
No,
that argument.
You know,
That's
it's the same way with the automobile industry and everything else. A lot of these places, oh, we're American made. We've got assembly plants in the United States, but, and that's a mighty big but there.
it's a but, but
Where are all your parts made?
yeah,
You can assemble it in the United States, but
it has become a global economy.
exactly. And you know, some people say, "Oh, that's great to do that. They do it that way. They can keep their costs down and all that kind of stuff." Well, what about transportation? And what, you know,
Well,
especially in times
that's
of
what's going on right now.
Exactly.
That's why you're seeing people right now advertising used radios, and not good used radios. I'm talking about junky used radios for the price of a brand new radio, and that's, they can get away with that as long as there are no new radios in the supply chain.
Exactly.
So that's where we're at today. It's kind of a sad situation right now. But speaking of older tube radios, something that I understand very well, and I have an all tube station for the most part, except for my ICOM. We're going to go back in time tonight, and we're going to talk about something that's coming up here in a few days. And there were a lot of firsts back in the early days of radio. And we have talked on this program several times about the fact that all of radio at one point in our history was all amateur. There was no professional radio. Even the early radio stations, the broadcast stations, just like a lot of the internet stations today, and some of the over-the-air, the low-power AM and FM stations that are on the air, are run by amateurs. And all the stations back in the day were amateur. Well, going all the way back to, I could set this up by saying a cold, brisk night in December. I don't know what the weather was like. This was December 11th of 1921, which predates me. But radio history was made because there was a signal from an amateur station, Station 1B as in Bravo, Charlie, Golf. 1 BCG in Greenwich, Connecticut, was heard in Scotland, all the way on the other side of the Atlantic, and this marked the first successful transatlantic radio transmission using shortwave frequencies. Now, prior to that, there had been transatlantic communication, but it was done on different frequencies, and it was done with very high-powered transmitters. But there was this organization called the ARRL, of which Pat and I are both members. Pat encouraged me when he challenged me to get into this hobby. When I got my license, he said, "Now, Jerry, you need to join the ARRL. That's our group that represents us." And I'm a big believer in them. But even back then, the ARRL was active and involved in radio. And what they said carried a lot of weight with Congress back in those days. And so the ARRL stepped in and said, "We think we can do this better. We think we can have our amateurs use transmitters that have less than a kilowatt, and we believe we can propagate long distances using these shortwave bands." And the bands that they were using at the time are bands that are still in use today, but they're not in use by amateurs. We're talking about the 200. Well, we'll go through it in a second as far as each of the bands. But anyway, today we would recognize these frequencies as our AM radio stations, our commercial radio stations that are on the air. So we're talking like 530 kilohertz up to 1,700 kilohertz in that area. So we're talking down in the below the 1 megahertz range.
Down below the AM broadcast band.
Yes, sir. Well, the initial run of these transatlantic tests was a total and complete failure. And so that's not any good way to start a story, but nobody was giving up. That's the other thing about amateurs, is amateurs tend to be tenacious. And there was a fella that was he was going great guns. He was one of our best and brightest. His name was Paul Godley, and he had the call sign 2Z Echo, 2ZE. He was considered one of the best operators of the day. And what the ARRL did is they gave him a special radio and they shipped him over to Scotland on a boat. And he had a 9-tube receiver that had been designed, and it had the latest in super heterodyne technology, which they had modified for the frequencies that they were going to use. And leave it to the ARRL, they decided to have a contest. I mean, when in doubt, have a contest, right? So in one of those historical coincidences during his voyage to England, Godley met a guy by the name of Harold Beveridge. Now, does that last name strike a bell with you, Pat?
Slightly.
Okay.
The old Beveridge antenna.
Yeah, Harold had invented a 1,300-foot antenna, which was now is called the Beveridge antenna, and he convinced Godley on this trip to take his receiver and put this with Beveridge's antenna that he had designed. There are people today that use Beveridge antennas. In case you're new to ham radio and you don't know that, or you haven't ran across that, it is a receiving antenna. Why is that not a transmitting antenna?
Because there's a 47 ohm resistor across it at the going to ground. They do that for noise elimination and some other stuff. That's actually why when you take the amateur test, that's one of the questions. And what it says is the composition of the antenna is, I think it's a coil, the wire, and a 47 ohm resistor to ground.
Well, this is one ginormous antenna. And I know this from the people that still use them today, because I had a chance one night to talk to a gentleman in Texas on the bands. We were on 40 meter, and he told me he was using a Beveridge antenna, and he said that he had me at 5'9". He said, I probably could pick you up better, but he said, I've got you on my Beveridge antenna. And he said, the antenna is not situated towards you. And I said, well, why don't you just, change how you have it? He said, no, you don't understand. This is not an antenna you can just go out and adjust.
I know where there's another one.
Where's that?
That's right across the border here at a certain.
That wouldn't be in Pennsylvania, would it?
At a certain contest station over there.
I see.
I've actually seen that one.
The one that has all my money.
Yeah, and mine too.
The one that needs to be sponsoring this program, frankly, but that's a whole nother story.
Yeah.
But at any rate, so here we've got Mr. Godley, and he's on his way. He's headed over to England, and he's going to be in England. He's going to be in Scotland, and he meets, of all people on the boat, Harold Beveridge. And so now we've got the Beveridge antenna, and we got Godley's 9-tube super heterodyne receiver. So this is not a piece of junk. And most people were using what we would say today, comparatively. Most receivers in those days was the equivalent of a crystal radio set. When you were a child, did you build a crystal set?
You bet.
I mean, we all did, right?
Powered it with a potato.
Now look, you had a fancy one then.
Yep.
Mine didn't have any power. Mine was just the power that came with the radio station. It was listening.
I remember they needed, the one I built actually needed like 1.2 volts or something like that to run it. And they suggested, instead of doing, it was one of your hobby kits, and
right.
They suggested rather than do that, to take and they gave you the 2 plates and told you to stick them in a potato.
Put them in a potato.
And it
there
worked.
You go.
It worked.
Who knew? Paul, I'll tell you, Pat, we learn all kinds of stuff from you. I got to go downstairs.
I'm just here to be amusing.
Potato and see if I can get 1.3 volts off of it. Well, over the course of the test period, more than 24 stations from America. All you got to say to amateur radio operators is you just have to say there's a contest this Friday. Trust me, everybody will be on the air. And as soon as they knew that there was going to be a contest, it was no different back then. Everybody wanted bragging rights. So over the course of the test period, more than 24 stations were heard between 2:30 and 2:35 meters, which 235 meters, that's like 1 point, just over 1 megahertz, I think. And so yeah, it would be below the 160 meter band. But most of them, some of them were using vacuum tubes. Some of them were spark gap transmitters, and they were heard all the way across the Atlantic Ocean, even with spark gap technology, which by then was being replaced by tubes. Most of what were the stations that were heard were CW, or Morse code. The one that was heard most consistently was a CW transmitter that was operated by 6 members of the Radio Club of America, RCA. There was Ernest Amy, 2VK, Edwin Armstrong, which is a famous name in ham radio lore, George Burghard, Minton Cronkite. And when I hear that, I think, I wonder if that was one of Walter Cronkite's, ancestors. John Grennan was one, and Walter Inman. These 6 men comprised the team, RCA, and their message got through for the very first time on December 11th, 1921 at 2152 UTC. So there you go. And so this is the event that we're going to commemorate here in a couple days. And there's going to be a big contest on the radio. And we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. But let's go back to these events. Now, this is a historical piece of footage, so it's kind of dry. But if you're a real ham radio aficionado, or you're really interested in this hobby, you're going to soak this up, because this is good stuff. This is one of the ways that we knew that ham radio was viable and that it had the future that it had, because everything was experimentation in those days. So Pat, if we can get the video up on the first, this is part 1 of a 2-part video on that first transatlantic communication that took place. Let's roll that thing when you get it.
We'll be back on the other side of this. You're listening to The World According to Elmer on Crooked River.
You beat me to it.
One of the greatest events in amateur radio occurred in December 1921. In fact, it was a great event or breakthrough for all radio communication. It made the headlines of many newspapers and magazines such as the Scientific American. Amateur activity was resumed in late 1919 when the World War I ban was lifted. Most amateurs following the war were still using the crystal set type of receiver. And for the transmitter, they had the low-power spark coil type of transmitter. DxO maybe 10 or 15 miles under favorable conditions. By 1921, however, the advanced amateur was using tube-type receivers. Here is ARRL President Hiram Percy Maxim with a regenerative receiver at his home station 1AW. Let us have a closer look at a modern 1921 station. Here one can see the regenerative detector receiver with honeycomb coils and the 1 or 2 stages of audio. At the right is a long-wave monitoring receiver. Yes, the amateur used to listen to long-wave ship and shore stations, since there were but very few broadcast stations in 1921. At the right foreground is the all-powerful 1,000-watt rotary gap spark transmitter. Average DX, 5 to 800 miles. What were the commercial stations using at this time? They either had Spark or Arc or a few low-power tube transmitters, and possibly the newly developed Alexanderson alternator transmitter. The Rocky Point antenna system was to be a series of antennas in a form of a cartwheel. Each antenna would be 400 feet high and 1 mile in length, pointing to different parts of the world. This is a sketch of what one of them would have looked like. Other large commercial installations were still using the vertical type of antenna. This is a 900-foot one. It was agreed at this time, more or less by the engineers, that the longer the wavelength, the greater the distance. The short wavelengths supposedly had very little value. The multiple tune type of antenna required several tuning houses. And this is an Alexanderson alternator, a giant motor driving an unusually designed alternator whose output is in the radio frequency range. A masterpiece of the electromechanical engineering. These two alternators are each capable of 200 kilowatts of RF output. We've now seen what the amateur was like in 1921 and the equipment used by the commercial interests for transatlantic communication. The amateur had been allocated the low, inferior wavelength of 200 meters, while the commercials were given the long wavelengths up to 10,000 meters for DX. Now let us pause for a moment. The stage is now set for the 1921 tests. The radio amateur had always been fascinated with great DX, and spanning the Atlantic would be the ultimate. The ARRL initiated a series of tests in December 1921, when selected American amateurs would transmit predetermined code letters to be received, hopefully, by European amateurs. One of the leading stations in the tests was one operated by members of a New York City club, the Radio Club of America. One of their members volunteered the use of his station in nearby Greenwich, Connecticut. It was a small building with a 75-foot mast. And since they wanted to use a large flat-top type of antenna fed in the center, they moved the building over into the center of the field. Members of the club are all businessmen or radio engineers who took time off from their work to construct a new type of antenna and transmitter. It was group effort and everyone pitched in. And much to their dismay, it started to snow before they could finish the antenna. It consisted of 8 wires in a form of an 18-inch diameter cage. The vertical section was also a multi-wire cage. One of the leading participants was none other than Major Armstrong, the inventor of the superheterodyne and later FM. The antenna was commonly known as the T-type. One end was held by a new 100-foot mast, while the other by the original 75-foot pole at the edge of the lot. Both the vertical and horizontal sections radiated. The system worked against an elaborate radial system. Much credit must be given to these early amateurs for their use of such an efficient antenna. Their antenna could easily compete with any elaborate present-day 160-meter antenna. A close-up of the wires going into the radio shack. The vertical antenna feed is in the foreground, with the radials in the rear. And just a reminder, this entire system, including moving the building, erecting the 108-foot mast, was all done in a matter of a few days. A nice view of the completed station. And here are the 5 fellows who undertook the project. Left to right, we have Ernest Amy, John Grenan, a crack operator, George Burgard, Major Armstrong, and Minton Cronkite, who is the owner of the property and the holder of the station call that they used. 1 BCG. This is a general view of the transmitter. At lower right is the 2000-volt ESCO motor generator set, which provided the plate voltage. The antenna tuning system is at the upper left on the ceiling. Their objective, of course, was to tune for maximum current. They attain 6.5 amperes at 990 watts input. A single UV204 tube, which is a 250-watt oscillator, is driving 3 similar tubes in parallel as RF amplifier. They encountered great difficulty in stabilizing the circuit, since this was before neutralization, and the amplifier tended to oscillate. A greater problem was in keying. The only way they could prevent chirping and the amplifier from breaking into oscillation was to key the amplifier grid circuit and the oscillator simultaneously. Oscillator keying gave a chirpy note, so they mounted a 3-turn coil in the oscillator tank circuit. Note the relay K1 and K2. When the key was up, the amplifier was off, and the oscillator was on a different wavelength. When the key was down, the 3-turn coil was out of the circuit, and the oscillator was on the correct wavelength, and the grid circuit in the amplifier was connected. In other words, the oscillator remained on at all times. Rather tricky, isn't it? Here is a close-up. It was hurriedly assembled. Note there was no separation or shielding between the oscillator and amplifier circuits. And strange to believe, this could have been the most modern and the most powerful amateur transmitter in the country. And as you will see, it proved to be exactly that. This is a display in the AWA Museum showing the development of the UV204. It was the first high-power transmitting tube made in America. Developed during World War I, it was first called the P-tube. It was given the number 204 in 1921 and is the 3rd tube down from the top.
Sorry about that. That ended quick.
And there it is. Well, that's part 1. And so we'll do part 2 next week, and you can hear the end of the story, which I guess I already spoiled. But fascinating stuff, isn't it? You know, you think today, we look at our stations here at home, and I've noticed on social media, a lot of newbies will put their station up and they'll say, well, this is just my small station, or this, you know, this is my humble station. And they don't realize that in their humble station and their small station, they have more going on than back in the early days with these biggest and greatest minds in the world putting their stations together. They couldn't have dreamed of what we have today.
Exactly.
I mean, that's fascinating stuff. And when you consider the voltages involved, ham radio back in the day was not for the faint of heart.
970 watts was that?
Isn't that something? And there was nothing shielded. You'll notice there was nothing caged off. It was just all right there. And it took guts to be a ham radio operator back in the beginning. But we call those long distance communications from one side of the Atlantic to the other DX today. And everybody wants to be a DX operator. That's why everybody wants to leave the technician license and get their general so they can get on 40 and 80 meters and 160 meters, and they can talk on the bands to people all around the world.
I guess
And
from
it's
what
a
I
great
heard, 10
thrill.
was open today.
What's that?
10 meters was open today, from what I understood.
10 meters, there you go. And a lot of people get on 10 meters. They talk over to Europe on 10. The reason I collect these QSL cards is it's fascinating to me where I can speak to sometimes on less wattage than you have in a common light bulb sitting on the end table next to your bed.
Yep.
It's incredible the distances that we can cover. Dxing is something that I think not every ham operator, but almost every ham operator that I've ever met wants to excel at. And I mean, how long was it, Pat, after you came into the hobby before you got onto the bands like 40 and 80 and made some DX calls?
Well, I was a little bit of a different breed, I guess.
Okay.
I actually did 28 years in the CB band, and in the CB band, communications like that was nothing. You could talk all over the world there, because where's 11 meters? Where's the CB band? Right below 10 meters.
Right. Well, and at one time it was a ham band, correct?
And exactly. And so, by the time I had got into ham radio, I was, it didn't thrill me. But when every time my situation changed and I decided to go after my general just to have it, I took and I studied. I studied and I got the license. And within about 2 weeks after I got the license, I had bought a radio and put a 17-foot antenna up on the roof with radials and everything. I bought one of those high gain 18-foot antennas.
Right.
Yeah, the AV something or other. And
that's what it is, the 18 AV.
I had I asked my son-in-laws to come over and help me put it up. Well, but one son-in-law is a ham, the other one's he's got a pretty good head on his shoulders. I got up on the roof and put it up, and was ready to try it out. So as soon as I got word that they were down off the roof, I was already in here, tuning around on it. And the first time I keyed it up, I went to Nice, Serbia.
Wow, that was your very first call.
That was the very, very first call HF-wise. I remember that like it was yesterday. And about 2 weeks later, on a different radio, because I got tired of the one that I had and I wanted something better, I did the same contact. I think it was about 3 weeks later, I'd made the same contact.
To the same person?
To the same person, right.
Did they remember you?
Yes, they did.
That's awesome.
We talked for about 10 minutes that time. And it was the typical conversation. What's the weather like over there? And what time is it? And are you getting ready for the snow? And what's the temperature today? And that kind of stuff.
And it's a great fascination finding out how other ham radio operators around the world live and the things that are important to them, what their home is like. I have a friend that I talk to frequently who is on a little island outside. It's halfway between Japan and China, and it's in the ocean. And he's a fascinating person, and he lives in a fascinating place. The only way people can get to his home is to take a ferry from Okinawa.
Wow.
Okinawa, and get out to their little island. He said when you go out in the ocean off of his island, he said you can go a quarter mile away from the island, and the ocean is only 4 foot deep. And I mean, he tells me all these things about where he lives, and it just is very interesting. And then he asked me about Ohio, and he asked me about the U.S. And it's funny, a lot of things that people believe about people who live in the U.S. And so it's interesting, I think, for them to compare how this individual lives versus what he's heard through the newspaper or on television or whatever. And so it's interesting stuff, and that's part of the charm of DX.
That kind of reminds me of a story here, that as far as some of the weird conversations you can have on radio. I was tuning around in 40 meters one afternoon. Okay, did a little bit here, nothing there. Okay, tune. All of a sudden, I hear this guy talking about his club he was in Macon, Georgia. And he was talking,
radio club.
And he was talking to some guy that was in North Carolina. And they're chatting back and forth. And what caught me is my club was just getting ready to go to 501c3. The nonprofit organization. They were talking about this when I tuned by it. And by the time this conversation was over, because I wanted to know what this was about,
right.
I ended up and wait until they were done talking. And then I called him on the radio, and I ended up talking to this guy for half an hour. And he told me, he says, I'll give you my email. He says, I'll send you an email and let you know. He says, let us know what you're thinking of, your thoughts are on it. Him and I just sat there and talked, I wouldn't call it business, but what it was like to be a 501c3 organization like that.
You
And
both had something in common.
exactly, and that's why we hit it off so well. I don't remember what this guy's call sign was, but I could probably look it up because I did write it down. And man was just a wealth of information, and I would have never got that if anywhere else.
Or you'd have paid for it.
Exactly. If I would have had, I could have probably got it from a lawyer, but this
That's
guy
what
was
I'm
like,
saying.
well, we do this, and we take in donations for this and that, and just a wealth of information. Anybody
That's good
listening to
stuff.
that? Anybody listening to that had to be having a good time.
And that's the point. You never know who's out there. You don't know what you have in common. You don't know what it is that is special about
And
them.
you
It's
never
like
know who's listening. You can
everybody's listening.
you can think, oh, I'm going to sit here and talk on 40 meters for a while. Nobody's going to hear me. Nobody can hear my little puny little station. And half the world is out there.
Well, speaking of DXing and half the world is out there, we have another little short video, and this is just some basics about DXing. So let's roll that thing. See what they
That
say.
was a good segue.
Yeah, I thought so.
You want to do that?
guys are blessed to be on the Crooked River Radio Network tonight. This is The World According to Elmer.
Okay, we're going to take a little bit of time and maybe just discuss some of the very basics of DXing. If you're just getting into DXing, or if it's something you always wanted to try, and or maybe you've been doing some DXing for quite a while and just have upgraded to a stronger antenna or an amplifier, or something that's really going to put you out there in the chase, especially during this January 2018 DXpedition of Beauvais. And Hal here is going to actually be on the island, so we're extremely lucky to be speaking with him and just touching base on basically DXing and what it is, and what does DX even stand for, Hal?
DX stands for distance, and I'm not sure the root of it or the origins of it, but in our vernacular it means distance, and in our hobby, of course, it means trying to make contact with distant stations.
Right.
And typically that means outside of your own home country.
And how does what is a DXpedition?
Okay, a DXpedition is a group or a few ham radio operators getting together and going to a location for the express purpose of making contacts with other hams around the world in pursuit of the DXCC award, which is the American Radio Relay League's prestigious award for that segment of the hobby that we pursue.
Right.
Currently, there's 339 entities available in the DXCC program. Entities or countries, the terms used interchangeably.
Sure.
And so, for those of us and you that are DXers, the challenge is to see if you can make contact, a two-way contact with all 339 of these entities or countries. And
So DXing has to do with working different countries. It's a lot of fun. It's my favorite part of the ham radio hobby. So for us here in the United States, for example, Canada is a DX entity, as is Saudi Arabia is a DX entity. A lot of people live there. It's going to be easier for you to speak to someone in Canada for a new DX CC country, or an ATNO as we call it, which stands for all-time new one,
all-time
right?
new one, sure.
An ATNO means an all-time new one for you that you've never worked that country on any band or mode. It's the first time you've worked them, and when you get into DXing, that's really exciting. Every ATNO that you get is really exciting. But all the DXCC entities, have people in them for the most part. So, working Britain as a DXCC entity might be fairly easy. The expedition comes into place when you got a DX entity that's very rare. And the rareness could have to do with the fact that it's an uninhabited island. As a matter of fact, where Hal's heading is the most remote island in the world. And that's why all the excitement, that's why you hear all the talk recently about 3Y0Z. It's been a long time since anybody's been on the island, and at a great expense and a lot of work by the team that's going there. They plan to activate that country so people like us can try to work it for a new one.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting, you know, for us to go there, and then just for the hobby itself, and for DXing in general. You know, there hasn't been anything like this, to my knowledge, ever. You know, the magnitude of this, I think after all said and done, you know, every superlative that you can come up with in terms of de-expeditioning will have been met or exceeded.
So when you get down to this island, and I know it's a lot of work just getting there with flights and long boat trips and everything like that, what does somebody do when they hear you on the air? How do they how do they go about contacting you? I understand you're going to be working split for the most part. I thought maybe we could just go over some of the basics of the terminology, so new guys can know what you know, what's going on as far as when you're working split.
Yeah, the whole trick is to make sure that the transmitting frequency, the DX that's transmitting, is on a given frequency. Then that frequency is clear, so that everybody else out in the world can hear that frequency. So we work split. We will listen in a range of frequencies somewhere other than our transmit frequency, and of course we would like to keep our transmit frequency clear.
Right, so you don't want anybody else transmitting on your transmit frequency, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
We would love that. And so we set up our VFO where we're operating split mode. We're listening in a range of frequencies, okay, which will be given. And so again, you listen for the range of frequencies that we're listening to, and we're transmitting on this frequency, on a separate VFO or variable frequency oscillator.
So they'll be listening to you here and calling for you there.
That's correct.
Keep the frequency clear that you're working on. What happens if somebody makes a mistake and forgets to hit the split button or something like that and calls on your frequency?
It happens. I mean, we recognize that. You know that's why they call us amateurs. And so if you do that, you don't need to come on and say I'm sorry or whatever. As soon as you realize you've made the mistake, you know, move up.
Right. And others don't need to join in and tell him that he made the mistake.
No, that's the policemen that get on is probably the bane of a de-expedition. And you know, we encourage people not to act as policemen. Typically, you know, if we see that our rate's declining, or rate, I'm meaning the number of QSOs that we make in a minute, let's say, then we might give a listen down on our transmit frequency to see if there's QRM or something going on. I mean, we can pretty much tell. And I think with the SDR, you know, I think we'll be able to maybe see some of what's going on down there anyway on the Maestro. So. And
if somebody, you know, does hear you in there and gets excited and wants to work you, you know, what type of protocol do they have as far as calling you? Do you want full calls and or half calls, or how?
Yeah.
What's the guy on your end prefer? What's he listening for?
Obviously, we would like to have the full call, and we'd like to hear that full call, you know, S9 plus, so we can log it in. But you know, recognize that you know, sometimes we might have to ask for clarification, or you know, we only hear a partial call. But yes, please encourage the DXer to call us one time, use full call, and also to use standard phonetics. You know, if somebody's using a Whiskey 8 HD and saying Whiskey 8 hot dog, you know, we're not going to recognize that necessarily.
So that's the key to remember, is that there's just, you know, tens of thousands of people that are going to be calling you at the same time.
Absolutely.
And, you know, a little bit of order and courtesy and, you know, common sense will allow a lot more people to be able to work you.
That's right, absolutely. It'll speed things along. At the end of the day, at the end of the DXpedition, more people will walk away from it smiling, and because they're in the log.
Right.
So.
Right. Okay, so Hal, I have a fairly substantial station at home, but what about the people that may have a small antenna, or or maybe the radio's only putting out 50 watts? What can they do to better their chances of getting you guys in the books in their logbook?
Well, first of all, there's still time to beef up the station, if that means putting up another wire antenna, or even connecting with another ham in the area that's got a better station. This is going to probably be the last opportunity to work Bouvet, which is the #2 most wanted DXEC entity, of the 339. The last major DXpedition there was in 1990, early 90, I think January of 90.
Right.
So, we're talking 28, 30 years ago. So you definitely do not want to miss the opportunity to work this. So for a casual DXer, I would encourage them to try to do whatever to get their station upgraded as best they can.
Definitely
at this point.
the first thing, yeah.
Assuming that cannot happen, don't give up hope. There will still be opportunities to work us as the pileups dwindle,
And the reason they dwindle is because more and more people are working you.
Correct.
And they only want to work you once on each particular band or mode. Is that correct?
Well, that is the wishes of us. I mean, we would like to think that if you work us on a 20-meter phone, that you're not going to work us the next day on 20-meter phone.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So and as that happen and those people drop off, then somebody with maybe a smaller station,
Right.
smaller antenna stands a better chance of
Sure.
working.
Sure. But from a standpoint of what can you do? My best advice is to get in there, to listen, to try to figure out if the operator does have a pattern in the way that he's working the split and calling, how he's doing that, and to stay with it. To me, there's a couple of things that you just need to keep in mind. You need to be persistent with your operation. You need to don't get discouraged, and you need to be patient.
Right.
You definitely don't want to just throw your hands up and say, I quit. This is crazy.
Especially for as big and rare as this entity is.
Yes.
There's been DX entities that I've called for probably over an hour straight.
Sure.
And
As
didn't
we all
get
have.
through. So
Sure.
right.
Yeah.
So you have to hang in there, be persistent. Realize there's a lot of other people with the same goal as you.
Absolutely.
And keep at it, like you said.
Yeah, and then there's another aspect too. I think you need to keep a positive attitude, throughout the process. If you think you're not going to be successful with this, you probably won't be successful.
Right.
But for me, and probably I can speak for the other guys on the team. We take no greater satisfaction than giving somebody an all-time new one,
Sure.
an AT&O.
Right.
I mean that's just the top in my book. I would rather do that than give some guy a band fill, on a band.
Right.
And so I'm looking for these guys. I'm looking for weak stations.
Well, you guys have been working on this for years, and it's a lot of money and a lot of effort.
Yeah.
So obviously, that's one of the goals. That they want to work as many of us as they can. That's why they're going through all this trouble, spending all this money, and traveling all this distance. So we appreciate it, and I for one hope to work you for an ATN.
I certainly hope you can get with me. Send me an email at the end and say, Hal, I worked you, and
That's right.
we will be uploading logs periodically to Club Log. I think last I read it was going to be maybe every 15 minutes or a half hour or something like that.
Nice.
So, you definitely want to check if you have a sketchy contact or you're not sure.
Right.
Check Club Log to confirm.
Yeah, because the option is waiting another 30 years.
Perhaps. perhaps.
Yeah.
But look forward to working with you.
I appreciate
really do,
that.
buddy.
Appreciate that.
Good luck.
Oh, that's good stuff right there. Dxing is good stuff, and it's interesting to hear him talk about it because I'm just doing all the answers in my mind, and he's talking about listening to the person who's calling the DX and looking for patterns and whatnot. Don't we all?
And I think you snookered us.
I snookered you?
Yeah, you just snookered us. That person that was talking there, for the most part, was one of Tim Duffy's friends that probably run his DX station out there. That's why he's so up on it.
Well,
I didn't recognize. I was sitting here and I thought, that background looks familiar. And then I saw my $10,000 radio sitting there.
There it is.
And I thought, that's DX. Mm-hmm. And I thought the snooker was on.
And I'll tell you what, when these guys go to different places around the world, and they operate from places that, as he said, that one station they were going to, the last guy that had been there was 26 years earlier. So there's some stations, some of these special event stations, you don't want to miss working them. And they have a lot of them listed in the ARRL magazine. So if you're not getting the magazine and you're not a member of the ARRL, you don't know what's happening out there that you don't know about. But all of these special event stations are all listed each and every month as far as what day they're coming up and where they're going to be. And then it's a very easy find at that point, because you zero in on the station that you're looking for and you pull up your reverse beacon on your iPhone and you punch in that station call letters, and bam, it'll tell you exactly where they're at and how many contacts they just made and what is happening.
I wanted to touch something here before we wrap this up. I did a little research on why you can't transmit on a beverage antenna, and this is what I found. Beverage antennas.
So we're back to the antenna that we were talking about earlier,
right,
where this gentleman that was on his way to Europe with his 9-tube super heterodyne receiver, Mr. Beveridge, Harold Beveridge, had this incredible antenna, and he talked this gentleman into using that antenna for the station.
Yep. Beverage antennas consist of a pair of transmission lines. One is the antenna proper, the other is ground. The antenna is being fed via open feed line, approximately 450 ohms.
Ladder line.
One side of the line being hot and the other grounded. To achieve directivity, now this is the key part, to achieve directivity, the antenna is also grounded via a 600 ohm resistor at the far end. I didn't know that's why they did that, but boy, that makes a lot of sense, because at the end of that antenna, if you didn't if you didn't cordon that off, an antenna will receive somewhat off of the end, but if you ground it, it's not going to do it. So there you have it.
Yeah,
I actually learned something tonight.
These are very big antennas.
Yeah, they're supposed to be. I think it said 40 to 15 meters, and I don't.
Wow.
But that sounds like a lot, but it's only you're only covering 2 or 3 bands.
Well, it's a fascinating story, and it's a great, and thank you. That's good to know. And all you got to do is invent an antenna that is exceptional, that nobody else has thought of, and you can name your antenna after yourself also.
Okay, and from what this says here, usually 40 to 30 meters is about as high, the highest bands that they are useful
Okay.
on. But they have, but there have been exceptions. I won't go into the whole article here. When I read that, when we were talking about that, I thought I'd like to look and see why they have to have the resistor in there. And that's why.
So if you were using a beverage antenna to receive, then at your station you would use a different antenna to transmit.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
And that's a lot of the reason why you have radios that will actually have 2 antenna ports on them. two antenna,
Good example of that.
SO239s.
A couple of Drake had a set of twins. Swan had twins where you had the receiver over here, you had the transmitter over here, and you had a switch between the two, and each had their own antenna. Now it could be the same antenna, but it could very well be different antennas. And a lot of these stations, especially contest stations, as Pat mentioned just a little bit earlier in the program tonight, run these antennas, and they're faced in a certain direction.
I've actually seen radios that have connections for ladder line on them. I can't remember the radio, but I've recently seen one that way. That would be Googleable. But then,
I know that my tuner has connections right on the back of it for ladder
line.
Yeah,
I think mine does too.
In fact, I'm running a 6-meter wire here at my house that I use on an AM network every night that I'm a member of on 6-meter. And my 6-meter wire antenna is fed by ladder line. So and it does an outstanding job. But it hooks right onto the back of the tuner, and you just flip a switch and you go to the ladder line, and it has a balun already built in. No muss, no fuss. All you do is just screw it onto the terminals on the back of the tuner, and you're good to go.
That's exactly right.
Well, we're out of time, and besides that, we're out of stuff to talk about. Next week, though, we'll come back with the remainder of that story on the first transatlantic transmission and reception, where we were able to go all the way across the Atlantic Ocean. What a big day it was in 1921 in amateur radio. Pat Morrow is our Elmer, N80QP. Glad you were here, Pat, and thank you for everything today. My name is Jerry Sorensen. I'm KG8RRY. And to you out there, you're the most important person in the room, and you're the reason that we're here. So we'll see you next Tuesday night, 7 o'clock again. Time change or no time change for The World According to Elmer, right here on the Crooked River Radio Network. 73, everyone.
73, all.
We hope you enjoyed this presentation of the Crooked River Radio Network. See you again soon.
Welcome to the Crooked River Radio Network. You can find us online at crookedriverradio.com, Live 365, Roku, Radio Garden, or just tell Alexa to play Crooked River Radio on Live 365. You can also find us on Facebook or Facebook groups by searching for Crooked River Radio.